Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Silva, and I'm going to talk to you very briefly about an esoteric OCD symptom that involves talking out loud. And it's thinking aloud. It's thinking aloud. It's basically what it is. But it is a compulsion. Like all OCD behaviors, it is a compulsion. And when we ask ourselves how this particular behavior is driven by anxiety, which all compulsions are, the anxiety, this is very subtle, it's very subliminal. It's not that you are worried about anything, it's simply an urge to articulate the thought. And really the anxiety, the dysphoria would come into play if you were impeded from doing so. And so maybe it'll make a little bit more sense in a little bit. But this is part of the OCD syndrome. Not all OCD sufferers experience it, but I know it's a part of the syndrome because I know what it feels like. I myself suffer from OCD, as if you've seen other videos in this playlist, you're aware. I inherited it from my mom. My mom did it. She would mutter under her breath as she washed the dishes. I walked in on her a couple of times where it was very clear in a sotto voce that she was thinking out loud. And I just do it whole hog. I've gotten to the point where I live alone, and if I feel like doing it, I do it. It is very loud. I'm not whispering, and it's entire sentences. And I think if somebody were to observe me doing it, they might think that's really odd. And as a matter of fact, I just remembered this years and years ago. I was in high school, so it was 30 plus years ago, and I was in my car and I was driving, and my then sister-in-law and my brother were in another car. I didn't see them. She was looking at me, and I was having a full-on, it's not a conversation, it's not like I'm talking to myself. People sometimes call it that, talking to yourself, but you're not really talking to yourself. You're talking out loud. You're thinking out loud is what it is. It's out loud thinking. But I was so animated, I guess, or I was just going at it, that even though she couldn't hear me, she could see that I was, and this was before, cell phones and Bluetooth where you could pretend that you were having a conversation. But I eventually looked up and looked over, and she had this wide-eyed look on her face like, oh my God, what's he doing? He must be crazy. And later she asked me about it, so that was funny. But so I've been doing it for that long, decades and decades, and there's no shame in it. It's a symptom. I'm not hallucinating. It doesn't mean I'm crazy. I don't do it when other people are around. I'm able to suppress it. But the urge is so strong. It's like an itch that needs to be scratched. It's like anything else that's predicated on hyposerotonergic neurotransmission, which is what I presume the pathophysiology is, because it's the same feeling that I get when I want to engage in a tic behavior. And I don't bite my fingernails, but it would be the same urge that you might have to bite your nails. You're not worried about anything, but the discomfort would be in not being able to do it. And so sometimes the urge to articulate my thoughts are so strong that when I am in public, say at the mall, like in the shopping mall, that I will mutter under my breath a little bit. This is very maybe embarrassing. I'm not embarrassed. There's no stigma, but I know it probably sounds a little odd and it may be a little awkward, but I'm an open book. If I've experienced something and I can explain a symptom better because I've experienced it, then I'm just going to share it, and stigma be damned. I'm going to lead by example. I really am not ashamed. And anyway, but in the mall, sometimes the urge to actually whisper it is so strong that I then become aware of the fact that my lips are moving and that I need to stop, because other people will look over at me and they'll say, oh my God, that guy's talking to himself. He's muttering under his breath like a crazy person. You ordinarily see that behavior in psychosis. I actually saw a young man moving his lips and talking to himself in sotto voce and staring at me with a flat affect one time at 24 Hour Fitness. But he was psychotic. I was able to assess by his affect and that what he was doing, he was hallucinating. And so he was responding to internal stimuli. That's not me at the mall, but it could be if as far as someone else is concerned, they don't know what I'm doing because it's not talked about. But when people have OCD, sometimes they're having thoughts, and sometimes it just feels better to articulate their thoughts out loud, especially if you're remembering something where you are talking to somebody. And I have another video on rehearsing that you might check out. But sometimes in preparing to talk to somebody, if we're a little bit nervous about it, or it's an important talk, whether we're going to ask for a raise, or whether we're going to explain ourselves, or set something up, or break up with somebody, and if there's enough anxiety, anticipatory anxiety about it, one might rehearse what they're going to say and actually rehearse out loud. And I know that this is a serotonergic phenomenon, one, because I know that it falls under the rubric of OCD because I've experienced it, I felt it, I know what it feels like to have an OCD compulsion like that. There are many. But the last thing I'll say about this is that I had a family member who was taking low-dose Effexor for hot flashes in menopause, and she was taking the medication and then decided to suspend it because she was experiencing nausea, and was driving and was thinking about something work-related and needing to talk to somebody about something, and she just spontaneously started verbalizing out loud. And she asked me about it. Could it be having stopped the Effexor? And that's absolutely what it was. She stopped taking the Effexor. Within hours to days, her serotonin levels started to plunge. And that drop in serotonin in a person with a family history of OCD and some mild OCD tendencies herself was enough to induce this symptom of feeling compelled in the moment to talk out loud. In this case, because she was thinking about a very important conversation that she had to have. It wasn't just randomly thinking out loud, what did I do today? What am I going to do tomorrow? And etc. But I have a much more extensive habit that living alone I give into. And but this is the last thing I was going to say about it. And this is really the last thing I'm going to say. I have another video on just one more thing. That's not what I'm doing here now, but I am being over-inclusive, which is part of OCD as well. I have to edit this stuff out because I go off on tangents, and that's OCD. The last thing I was going to say about this is that sometimes, now this is the part that's probably going to sound the craziest. I am by myself, and I'm thinking aloud, I'm talking aloud, and I start to eat. And of course, when you've got food in your mouth and you're chewing, can't be talking, food would be flying everywhere, right? You got to chew and swallow. You can't talk when you're swallowing. I mean, you have to stop talking. And the urge to do this is so strong that instead of continuing the thought mentally, just, shifting gears, and now I'm not saying it out loud, but I'm still thinking, I actually will hurry up and chew and swallow and not take the next bite to resume talking out loud. I have done that many a time. As I'm doing it, I know how insane it is, and I use words like crazy and insane with affection. Okay, I do it myself, but I notice how, wow, the urge to scratch that itch is so strong that it's interrupting my meal, when it would be really easy to just make the decision to just go ahead and finish the thought mentally, which is what I usually do now, because I have insight now and I realize that, I need to eat and the food's getting cold or whatever. But there it is. There you have it. The compulsion to think out loud. Thanks for joining me. Comments are always welcome.